this shit.
Always thinking about nights, difficult being changed. Take it back to cigarettes. Get around the time.
Everybody get up.
Carnivals, this will be alright. Let the ashes fall. You can read the campfire. Get one time.
Everybody get up.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Let's see here. My name is Lee Love, and thanks for joining us tonight. This is the Friday edition of the Photo Mentor question and answer period, and we're glad you joined us. If you're joining us here live, then you can ask questions. If you are joining us, if you're watching the playback, glad you're here just as well. And you can also ask questions if you'd like. Send your questions to help at photomentor.tv, and we'll be glad to add those to next week's show, or I may try and reply directly if it's something that you need some help with. Anyway, again, glad you're here. The purpose of this show is to help new photographers. There's just so many questions out there that I see that new photographers are struggling with, and I see that they're not necessarily getting the answers that they want, which is very frustrating for me. And so I felt that that was a need. There was a need there to help help new photographers, and so that was the reason for starting Photo Mentor TV. So that's also the reason for starting this live stream. Anyway, glad you're here. Again, if you have questions, feel free to ask them. You can again put a Q in front of the question in the comments on Facebook, or if you're watching on YouTube, you can do the same thing there, and they'll show up here on my screen, and I'll get a chance to answer them for you. If you, again, as I said before, if you want to ask questions and you're watching this in a replay, then you can also send an email to help@photomentor.tv. Also, I wanted to mention that I started something last week, a couple weeks ago, I guess, and it's a photo review, and the idea is to allow you to submit photos so that we can get some feedback on them. And the way it works is you can submit up to 3 photos per month per review. Okay, you can put a few more in there if you want, but it's, you know, if it gets too many, then I'd like to keep it a little simpler. The reviews will be anonymous, so they're really just, the idea is I don't want to discourage anyone. I want to encourage you. So we'll use some kind of a numbering or lettering system, so anyone can submit photos. It doesn't matter how long whether you shot them on your iPhone or whether you shot them on, Hasselblad. I don't care. If you're a new photographer and you want some feedback and input on your images, then feel free to contribute. And again, don't feel embarrassed. The images will be, I'll look at them to see how they work. It's not about whether I like them or not. It's whether I think you've accomplished your goal. And I'll use that by looking at the subject matter. If the subject comes through and I can clearly determine, oh yes, I see what they're trying to say here. They'll be looked at on technical merit, obviously. And then, of course, the most important, which is composition and what the framing and that type of thing. And then also the lighting. Let's see here. The image, I'll do this once a month on the first Friday of the month. So I think the next one is, I forgot, November 6th, I think, is the next one. I have to look. And so you can submit your photos, and then we'll compile those and add those to the list. The photos will, the way you do this is, I haven't got it completely finished, but if you will send me an email to help@photomentor.tv, and in the subject, if you don't mind putting the word review so it gets filtered then and I can be sure and see it amongst all the other email I get. And I will send you instructions. I'm working on getting this automated so it's a little more easier to deal with. But for right now, just send me an email and I'll tell you how to submit your photos. I've already got a couple of photos, a couple of images, a couple of photographers have submitted work for next month, which is great. And I am looking forward to that, of course, as usual. So, let's see. Again, if you have questions, be sure and submit them. So let me get to our first question for tonight. Got a couple things. We've got quite a few, actually. I'm going to try and get to them as best I can. The first question is from Simon Hall, and he says, why are people so against continuous lighting for portrait work? And I would say, Simon, that's kind of a mischaracterization. It's not that they're against constant lighting. In fact, constant lighting has been used for decades before strobes were ever developed. In Hollywood, if you look at any of the classic Hollywood portraits that are done, those are all done with constant lights. And they're called hot lights at the time because they were halogen lights, and they put out a lot of heat. And so that was one disadvantage. But the reason that a lot of people don't use them for portraiture is because, see if I can explain this to you. First of all, some people do use them, so there's not a problem there. And especially now that the LEDs are becoming less expensive and more powerful, you can use an LED light. In the past, unless you used what again was I called a hot light, the fluorescence or the incandescents or tungstens were really kind of inconvenient. But now with the LEDs, it's become much more popular. These are LED lights that I'm using here. Of course, if I'm shooting, I like to use strobes. But here's the deal. If you're using constant light, then you have to deal with both aperture and shutter speed. In other words, if your shutter speed isn't high enough and the person moves, then you'll get some blur. So you have to shoot at a higher shutter speed to be able to do that. Well, when you shoot at a faster shutter speed, it also means that you are going to have to shoot at a wider aperture or a higher ISO. So you're kind of always dealing with that issue as far as lighting is concerned. Now, when you start talking about strobe lighting, you don't have that issue. Now, this is not going to make sense to a lot of people, and I know that, especially if you're a new photographer, but shutter speed has no effect on strobes or flash. And what happens is it only has an effect on the ambient light. So here's an example. My analogy is, what's the shutter speed of lightning? Well, there isn't one. It doesn't matter. It's so fast that you could never catch lightning using your shutter. So what you do is you open the shutter when you think it's going to lightning, and then when the lightning goes off, you close the shutter. Well, it's the same thing with a flash. If you're in a completely dark room, and you can turn that thing on to 30 minutes, or not quite 30 minutes, but let's say 5 minutes, or an eighth of a second, or 30th of a second, or whatever, and the flash goes off, the exposure is going to be exactly the same. It will not have any effect at all on the exposure. The only thing it's going to have an exposure on is the shutter, the aperture. The aperture will affect the power rating of the shutter, and that will have an effect. But other than that, that's it. So that's one. So like I can go into a conference room, and if sometimes they can't turn off the overhead fluorescent lights, not a problem. I can go in there. I can shoot at 2/50th of a second. The room will be completely dark if I do that. Turn on my strobes, adjust to get a light reading on the strobes, whatever the aperture for that needs to be. And then I'm done, and that's all there is to it. So now the opposite would be true. If I want some ambient light, let's say I'm photographing a magazine article or something, and I want the environment of the person, then what I will do is I will slow the shutter speed down so I pick up more of that ambient light, and then you add the strobe power to match that so that it looks more realistic and it fills it in. So it's not that people don't use constant lighting for portraits. It's just that flash puts the other thing is flash puts out much more power in that short burst. So you get this 500 watt seconds or more of power really quickly in a small duration. And it also is it freezes the action. It's very sharp. You get a nice crisp image out of it, and they're typically are going to be less expensive, not less expensive, probably about a little more expensive actually, but you're going to get a higher power flash. They're also great if you're doing outdoors because you can also do battery powered flash. Well, you really can't do battery powered. You can actually. You can do battery powered LEDs, but they're not very powerful. Not as powerful enough to overcome the sun like a strobe would be. So that's the reason that most people prefer flash over constant light. It's not that you can't use it, especially in a studio. It's just that you find that flash can be more flexible. Now, the other thing, one last thing I'll say is that for a new photographer, constant light is really nice because when you're setting it up, you can see what's going on. You can see the shadows when you move the light around. You can see the brightness. You can see the exposure, and so it's a lot easier for a new photographer because they can see exactly what's going on. Where a flash, you may have to take a couple of test shots, and you might take a couple of test shots to be able to see what the picture is really going to look like. Okay, let's see here. Okay, all right. So I've got a question here. Let's see if this is Keith has a question about, okay, it says when you go to travel, what do you bring with you? So it depends on the kind of shoot I'm doing. Let's say I do a lot of on location work. So let's say it's a magazine shoot. I usually carry I like to try and travel as light as I can, but I want to be as flexible as I can. So I always carry more stuff than I need. It's just kind of the nature of the business. But what I do is I carry two Profoto B1s, which are battery powered 500 watt second strobes. They are as I said, battery powered. They have the radio receiver already built into them. I have a transmitter on my camera that I can trigger quite a ways away. And so that's my setup that way. Camera I usually carry is a Nikon D810. Or maybe a Panasonic, a G9 or GH5 if I'm going to shoot some little video, or maybe I want to just do some stills with the mirrorless. I might do that. And I carry two umbrellas. Now I always have in the car light stands and that kind of stuff if I need it, but I try not to be able to use all that stuff. I try to just go light as much as I can. Get in, get out. Again, typically I'm working, if I'm doing a magazine shoot, an editorial shoot, a lot of times that's in and out. I'm imposing on this person's time. Sometimes it's in their home, sometimes it's in their office, could be anywhere. And so I don't want to impose on them, and I don't want to impose on the facility or where we're shooting, so I'll try and be as efficient as possible and get in and out and do that. So anyway, hope that helps. Okay, so we'll get back to the next question here. Okay, whoops, got that one. So I'd love some tips on this is from Stephanie. I'd love some tips on the best settings for outdoor photos, specifically of people, engagement photos, couples photos, or kids. Well, it's kind of Stephanie, it's kind of a broad question. There's a lot to that, but I would say, and you're kind of asking for settings, and when anyone asks for settings for their camera, that typically says to me that you don't quite understand what's going on, because the settings, I could give you my settings, but that's not going to make any difference because I have a different camera, I have a different lens, the environment's different, the surroundings are different, the sun is different, the location on the earth is different, and so all that comes into play there. But so instead of saying settings, what I would tell you is a couple of other things that might be some tips that would help you. Number one, watch your background. Background. The background can either help or really hinder or hurt your photo. I've seen so many images where there's all this sky that's all blown out as a background or whatever, and it just detracts from the photo. So when you look through that viewfinder, you can move 6 inches and it'll make all the difference in the world of that background. So look for, the first thing I do when I go into a location, for example, to shoot, is I always look for the background. How can I use this background to help reinforce the story or the subject of the image, or how do I want to get rid of the background? That's the first thing. The second thing is try, if you don't have a lot of great lenses, expensive lenses. A lot of people think you got to have a lot of expensive lenses to get that blurry background. You may want it. Now, you may want to blur the background, but you may not. That's the other thing to keep in mind. A lot of people on these groups will say, oh, you got to have a 50 or 35 millimeter 1.8. And if you shoot a 1.8, it's going to blow out. The background's going to be completely out of focus, but that may not be what you want to do. If it's a nice scene, you may want to include some of that background. So therefore, maybe you want to shoot at 4.5, 5.6. So the thing I would say is, get if you have an 18 to 55, or maybe a 55 to 2 or 300, or 70 to 200, 300, back up and zoom in to about 100 millimeters. And then if you have to if you have to move around back and forth, that's fine. But what that does is, by using the longer focal length, by zooming in, it compresses the image, meaning it's going to bring the background closer. It's also going to compress the facial features if you're photographing people, which is really going to be a little more enhancing. And it's going to blur the background. So that's a good way to do it if you don't have some $2,000 lens to be able to do that. So the third thing is, engage your people. If you have to shoot on auto, shoot on auto. It doesn't matter. Don't get hung up on the technology and the tech and the camera settings and fumbling with that. A good picture is going to come through based on the expression and the emotion of the people that you're photographing. If they look like they're having fun and they're great, that's what's going to make the photo. No one's going to know what you shot it on. No one's going to care. The client's certainly not going to care. And so a lot of photographers will spend all their time talking about the technical stuff, and they forget that that we're artists. This is art, and you're trying to create a meaningful image that really draws people in and engages people. So you want to focus on that more importantly than the technology, and get your client or your people you're working with, find out something about them, ask them about themselves, talk to them while you're working with them, and try and get them to loosen up, and that will make a difference. People that are not used to being in front of the camera need directions. You got to help them. You got to encourage them. Just tell them, hey, you're looking great. You guys are great. Turn your head this way. Do this. Put your hands here. They want to know what to do. Their hands are uncomfortable. Sometimes I will bring props, like something to do with their hand. If it's in a business environment, I'll have them hold a pen, or I'll maybe have them take off their glasses. Because it gives them something to do with their hands, and it makes them feel more comfortable. If it's a family or something like that, you can bring some goofy little, some kind of thing to give them play with these things, paddle balls or hats or sunglasses or whatever, to try and get them loosened up and to get them comfortable in front of the camera. That's the most important thing. So anyway, I could go on and on, but that's the deal with that. And there's so much you can do. That it's not about the settings, that it's really about getting the subject, getting them comfortable, and capturing some emotion. Okay, so Debbie says, I've taken some shots on auto, and I think they're pretty good. Well, that's good, Debbie. I think, nothing wrong with shooting on auto when you're starting out, believe me. I'm now learning manual. Why take them manually, then edit and touch up, and seems like it's cheating? It's kind of a mixed question. So first of all, if you're shooting on manual and you're having to take them in and edit them, it sounds like what you're saying is you're having to correct them. Like there's something that's not right when you shoot on manual. And that's not uncommon. So I'm not a big believer in shooting on manual unless you're shooting on, there's reasons to shoot on manual, don't get me wrong, but if you're just starting out, I would suggest if you're trying to move off of auto, to first go to aperture priority, okay? Put the camera on aperture priority, and then figure out what aperture you want to use to be able to get the shutter, to get the depth of field that you want, and then go from there. So and I shoot probably 99% of the time on aperture priority, and most of the professional photographers that I know do as well. For some reason, I don't know, I see all these wedding photographers or people in these groups saying you have to shoot on manual. I don't agree with that. There are times that I shoot on manual, but that's a different, that's typically when I'm in the studio and I'm using strobe lighting, that kind of stuff. But anyway, so there's no reason that you have to shoot on manual. So if you're having to go in and correct a lot of correct a lot of stuff because you think that you're having to edit because your pictures are not right on manual, then it probably has to do with the settings. Whoops, there we go. Probably has to do with the settings, not anything to do. As far as editing and touch-up, that's the other half of the process. People have been editing photographs since the beginning of photography. Nothing wrong with bringing your photos in and finish them off. So 50% of the work is capturing it, 50% of the process is editing. You're the dark room. When you were shooting film, you didn't think anything about shooting film and then go and take it into a lab and having them print, process, color correct, and print them. That's the same thing you're doing. You may want to sharpen it, and especially if you're shooting on raw format, which if you're familiar with that is just it's not an image, it's just a bunch of data. The camera then purposely will not sharpen or enhance the saturation or contrast. It assumes you want to do that in this later in software to give you more control. So it's not cheating. It's really, you're an artist, you're just trying to finish off your concept of how you see the photo. So don't feel like it's like it feels like it has to be that way. So Legna? I'm sorry, I'm not sure of the name. I have a Nikon D3000. Is this a good camera or it's junk? It's a good camera. It's just that it's old. It's a little older. And what you'll find is between the 3000 and the latest one, which is the 3500, there was a 3200, there was a 3300, I think. Maybe even a 3400, I don't know. I can't keep track. They improved the cameras considerably, and there's two things you'll see in almost every new model of camera. Now, they'll add some bells and whistles, but the two main things you will see them add are better low light performance. You can shoot a higher ISO without as much noise, and better focusing. So those are the two things. So the difference between the low light performance of a D3000 and a D3500, which is available now, is considerably. It's probably 3 or 4 or 5 stops maybe of light. You can get more with using a higher ISO. Okay, let's see. Got another question from Keith here. Let's see. We'll bring this on. Let's see what Keith has to say. Keith is asking, what is the rule of thirds? Oh boy, Keith, that's a whole big conversation. But essentially, it was discovered by the painters and masters many decades, centuries ago, that the human eye looks at things is if we divide the image up into thirds, we have a line across the middle, 1/3 down, a line at the bottom, 2/3 down, one line on the left, 1/3 in, and the other one 2/3 in. And if you can put a subject and the X, kind of where one of those cross points happen, you'll find it's much more pleasing. Now, it's a rule. It's not a, it's not a law. It's just a rule. It's just a guideline. And you'll find it. So, like, here's a good example. I see a mistake a lot of people do is in landscape photography especially. They'll shoot with the horizon line right in the middle. Okay, the sky is 50% and the ground is 50%. That's probably, in most cases, the most boring thing you can do. So what you have to do is you have to look and say, okay, what's more important, the foreground or the sky? If it's the sky and it's got all these clouds and maybe there's some airplanes or something, then maybe the sky is the most important thing. So what you would do is you would tilt your camera up and you'd put the horizon line at the bottom 2/3 of the frame, and you'd put the sky at the top, the bottom 1/3, and the sky at the top 2/3, and that's going to draw the eye to the sky, which is going to tell the person that's viewing the image that's the most important thing. So there's a lot of information about this. I'm actually working on some videos on this that I'll be releasing on rule of thirds, but it's a kind of a complex issue. It's not complex to understand, but a lot of people have problem with it. It's probably the simplest thing you can learn that will improve your photos. And if you start looking at some samples of the masters photography, of paintings and things like that, you'll see that they definitely used a rule of thirds in their setup, and that is one of the things that makes them so interesting. So again, what we're trying to do is draw the viewer's attention to the most important thing in the frame. That's our job as a photographer. So it's not like it's a rule you have to do it and the picture's no good if you don't do it. But if you put something right in the center, number one, it's boring, and number two, the person's looking around, they go, okay, I guess that's it. They don't quite know what to look. But if you put it over on the left or the right or something, your eye is drawn immediately to that part of the frame because of the dead space, or white space it's called, on one side or the other. And that tends to make the eye go to the object that you're trying to draw attention to. So that's the deal with it. That's why you use rule of thirds. Okay. All right, so Devin says, I have a Tamron 18-250 DI version 2 lens, and I want to upgrade from a D3000 to a Nikon D3400. This will be compatible, or will this be compatible, and will I be able to use autofocus? I currently can't autofocus on my D3000. Okay, so here's what I'm going to explain to you. So in Nikon parlance, there are two kinds of whoops, didn't mean to do that, sorry. Hang on here. In Nikon world, there is, they came out, originally the lenses, and I'm going to show you one. They have two kinds of lenses. Originally, the lens, the camera did the lens. There was a motor in the camera, and it focused the lens. Well, as they became more sophisticated, they changed that, and they then took the motor and put it in the lens, and that is what this is one of the this is the Tamron she's looking at here. This is the 18-250. This lens is discontinued. It's an older lens, but it only works with the Nikon cameras that have the focusing motor in the camera. Now, if you look at this D7000, there's a little pin right here. It's like a screw, and that has there's a motor in the camera, and that will move the focusing in the lens. The 3000, 5000, everything below the 7000 series, the 7, does not have that little point, so it won't focus. So what's happening, and she's got a lens that will won't focus because the camera doesn't have a focusing motor. So let me see if I can show you this here. Okay, so here is a lens that is an older lens. This is a, what is this? This is a 50mm 1.8D, and the D is an older lens. But if you look, okay, right here, you can see there's, it looks like a little screw a screwdriver would go in there, and you probably could put it in there and turn it. Well, that is what focuses the lens. So if the camera doesn't have that, as I showed you in the other picture, okay, if it doesn't have that, then you can't. If you're looking at the one on the right, it doesn't have the focusing motor in it, then it's not going to be able to focus this lens. So that's the problem. So if you look at, again, so this is an older lens. This has to have a camera body that has the motor in it. Now here's another lens. This is a newer lens. This is also a 50mm. It's a 1.4. But if you look, it's what they call a G model. If you look, there is no, it's focusing, a motor focusing in the camera, because the focusing is done in the lens. The motor is in here. So it's all handled electronically. In fact, don't know if there's, let's see if we can see this or not. If you look, also, if you look at the number of pins, these little things right here, okay? See, this is the older lens. See how there's not as many pins on there, but this one does. Well, that's why, because this sends information to from the camera to the lens to tell it to focus. So that's the deal on that, and that's why your lens does not focus on that lens will not focus on that camera, because it's too old. It's not designed to do that. You would have to have, you could get the D3400 won't be any different. It's going to be the same kind of thing. You'd have to go to something like the 7200, 7500 or above to be able to get that to work. So I hope that helps. And sorry, but that's kind of the way it works. You can still focus manually, but it's just a little bit of a little difficult. Okay, let's see what else we got here. Again, I want to remind you, if you want to ask a question, be sure and put a Q in front of your question when you post it on either YouTube or Facebook, and we'll try and get to it best we can. Okay, so what exactly can I use a 55 to 250 millimeter lens for? All kinds of things. Anything you need to tell a photo. You know, a 250 millimeter lens is going to be pretty good for some basic sports stuff, a little bit of wildlife. Anytime you need that extra reach, really. So, and in fact, you could even use it for portraiture, because if you think about it, my favorite portrait lens is an 85 millimeter, but you can use anything you wanted. So if you zoom that from 55 to about 100 millimeter, right around there, 85, whatever, you can, whatever looks good to you, you can then use that as also a portrait lens. You just have to back up a little bit, but it will still do the same thing, and you can get a really nice background by that. So it's not a bad lens. It's not one of the pro lenses, but it's got what they call variable aperture, meaning when you zoom from 55 to 250, the aperture is going to change, but it's still not a bad lens. Again, I want to remind everybody that once a month, on the first Friday of the month, we're doing photo review. If you want to submit your photos to have me take a look at them and give you some feedback on them, be happy to do that. Reviews are anonymous. And again, it's not intention to, it's not going to be a love it, hate it, or it's just I want to really encourage you, not discourage you. But they'll be anonymous, so you can put it, you can send them to me, of course, and I'll know who you are, but I won't publish that information. When I do them on the show, they will not mention your name. I'll look at them from a perspective of composition, technical, and subject. See how I think they, achieve those things, whether they work or not in those categories. And I'll do this once a month on the first Friday of the month on this. So I think I said before, I didn't look it up, but I think the date is November 6th, if I'm not mistaken, which is when the next one will be. And if you want instructions on how to submit your photos, send me an email to help@photomentor.tv. If you don't mind, in the subject, put the word review so that it'll filter out for me, and I'll send you some information on how to submit those photos. And I'd love to have you I'd love to look at other people's work, and I'd be happy to do that. So feel free to send that in. Okay, see what else we got here. Okay, so Sandra asks, do you use a laptop for those, or those normal computers to edit photos? I'm not sure what a normal computer is nowadays, but the laptops have gotten pretty powerful, and there's a lot you can do with them, especially if you're editing on the road. I use a laptop for tethering. If I'm at a client location, I'm doing product photography or something where I want them to see what's going on, I'll connect the camera to the computer, and as the images are shot, they can see them coming in. They can make decisions. Oh, we like that one, we don't like that one. So laptops can be helpful. They're pretty powerful nowadays, and they've gotten better and better. And so I would say you could use a laptop. Personally, I don't like to use a laptop for editing. I mean, I have a nice 27-inch screen. I want a calibrated monitor. I want to know what I'm looking at, and I want to do it in an environment where I have good lighting and kind of the same environment over and over, so that my work is consistent when I edit it. So you could do a laptop, but it depends on your situation. If now the option might be have a laptop and an external monitor, a nice external calibrated monitor, and then you could connect that together, and so you could use that sort of like a desktop environment, but do your editing on a larger monitor with a mouse and a full-size keyboard. That would be one option you could do. Okay. All right, so I recently purchased my domain, and now I need a hosting site. Who do you guys use? Boy, there's a lot of them out there. That's I've done a lot of them. I built a lot of my own websites for other people, for myself as well as other people, and it's easier and easier. But I would say what's ironic is when it came to building my own website, I didn't build my own because I just didn't want. I wanted something that other people maintained. I didn't have to worry about updates and software and all that kind of stuff. And so I went with a site called Squarespace. They've been around a long time. I think they're pretty reasonably priced. They've added more and more features. It just works. You just kind of put your stuff there. You can edit it yourself. You can move things around in different templates. Very professional looking. So that's the site that I recommend. But I know a lot of other people use some of these other sites that are available for selling their images and things like that. But Squarespace is the site I use for my stuff. So I don't know if that helps or not. Okay. Having pictures with a real Santa. Oh wow, cool. Yeah, he's hard to get a hold of this time. Probably this time of year, COVID, he's not very busy. For the first time this Saturday, any tips or suggestions would be greatly appreciated. Well, again, it's all about the kids. You want to, and in the emotion and the expression, a parent is going to love a picture with a Santa when the kid is, got emotion, expression. And so what you're going to try and do is you want to, if it's a good Santa and he knows how to bring that out in the children, you want to anticipate those moves. It's not about, it's about looking for that moment and then capturing that moment. Watching when you see what's going to happen. Watch the eyes of the child. Watch Santa. Watch what's going to happen really closely and try and catch that moment when that expression happens. It's almost like shooting sports, believe it or not. It's not about shooting thousands of pictures. It's about getting the right expression, and you want to learn to anticipate that expression and watch what's going on and learn the child's body movements and when they do things, especially when you'll see a lot of child in amazement. They're kind of looking at Santa, and then they'll start to put their hand up and touch his beard. You want to wait for those kind of moments and capture those moments. Okay, Frater says, this might be a dumb question, which I really like dumb questions, by the way. They make me look really smart. But what I need to do to start a photography business? Wow. Well, the joke is if you want to make $1 million as a photographer, start with $1 million. It's a tough business. I will say that it is, I believe it is, photography is, as a business, is 80% business and 20% photography. And I speak from experience in doing that. And what I mean by that, I'm not trying to discourage you. I'm just trying to give you some realistic perspectives here. Unfortunately, when we work as photographers, we don't always shoot as much as we'd like. So if you put a shoot together, you're organizing, you're scheduling, you're invoicing, you're taking payments. You do a lot of that, taxes. You're doing all that back-end work that you didn't really want to get into doing. That wasn't why you got into doing photography. You got into photography because you love photography, you love shooting images, and you want to be creative. So that's the problem. So just got to be aware of that. I'm just telling you, go in with your eyes open. Nothing wrong with that. And here, let me tell you real quickly how you get around that. You shoot personal projects. So yes, you shoot your client work, but you also want to have a couple of your own personal projects available that you're shooting just for you. Hire a model, hire a makeup artist, whatever, get some children, put something together that you see in your head. something that you want to photograph for yourself. May not even show up on your website, but it also gives you a chance to experiment, try new ideas and new concepts, and that will keep you fresh, because the other stuff can get stale. It becomes like a job when you're doing that. So just be aware of that. The other thing, now look, I'm not an accountant, I'm not an attorney, so any kind of advice I give you is just my own experience of what's happened for me in my state. You can probably set up an LLC online. It's pretty easy to do. You want to set up a bank account separate from your personal account under that name, and you want to track everything you purchase through that account. Any of your camera gear, get QuickBooks or some kind of accounting program, and invoices, and put all your invoices through there. Show up everything through your bank account, through a debit card or whatever. And that way, when at the end of the year, when you go to your accountant, you can download a file, send them a file, send them all your transactions, and they can then put your work together really easily, or you can do it yourself. It makes a lot of sense. It's the way I track all my stuff, and that way it's the only way I know what's going on, because you get busy, you're buying stuff here and there. And so anyway, now this is not accounting advice, but I can tell you that one of the things you can do when you're starting out is you may not have enough revenue in your account to pay for things. So let's say you need to order an umbrella from Amazon or somewhere, but you don't have the money right now. Well, what you can do, and again, check with an accountant on this, because this is not advice, but I'm just telling you, you can take and transfer, let's say it's $50. You can transfer the $50 from your personal account to the LLC bank account. And I believe the way that works is then that shows up to your accountant as a loan to the company. And so then when you make money, you can pay that loan back. And so that's a way that you can transfer money back and forth. That's second, I believe, sometimes can help your personal account, your personal taxes as well. But again, I am not the person to ask for that kind of stuff. I'm totally the wrong guy to deal with that on taxes, and I'm awful. Every year, at the end of the year, my poor accountant is just, pulling her hair out. So anyway, but so I would say at a minimum, LLC and a bank account, and those are two things you need. It wouldn't hurt if you had a camera, but those two things. That way you can track your expenses and your income and keep it separate from your personal account. That's my advice, at least. Okay. So, I don't have a following on Facebook. This is from Lisa. I don't have a following on Facebook, and I barely any on Instagram. How do I even get people to participate in my portfolio building sessions? I have one friend who is interested in some outdoor Christmas shots at her home. Family and friends. You just anything you can find. If you're a member, if you have a church or some kind of group that you're involved in. See if they need some photos. A lot of times they need photos for the pastor or the staff or something like that. Do some portraits on that, on things like that. Just wrangle any of your friends. You can hire some models off of Craigslist maybe. I will tell you that I've not had good luck with that. They kind of get flaky. You definitely have to pay them. If you do a trade for prints or for images, they a lot of times don't show up. They're like, oh, sorry, something came up, I couldn't make it. And so they'll bail on you. So you want to make sure that you are, if you can, pay, even if it's $25, pay somebody to come and be a model. I'm always looking at people. I loved photographing interesting people. I had one image I did of this bodybuilder who that I did as a personal project. That my wife came in his office, and he was a rep there, and she said, man, you got to photograph this guy, he's huge. And she said, I said, well, ask him. He said, sure, no problem. So, anybody you think that's interesting that matches the kind of work you want to shoot. Now, that's the key. You want to photograph things you want to get hired to do. So if you want to do families, you got to find families that'll let you photograph them. You might post something on your bulletin board at your church or at your grocery store or somewhere where there's people that may go that may want photos. That may be one, or you can obviously post something on Craigslist saying photographer looking to build portfolio, that kind of thing. I just would caution you, make sure you have somebody with you. Lisa, make sure you have, your husband or boyfriend or somebody, a friend with you, just to be safe. The reverse is true for me. I will not photograph a young lady unless I have somebody else there with me, a friend. I ask her to invite her friend or boyfriend or something, just so there's no shenanigans going on. But that keeps it above board. So there's plenty of people out there that are looking for photos, believe me. So just got to ask around and say, hey, do you know anybody's looking for photos? Ask it. Again, any in your community or anything like that, you ought to be able to find somebody. But you could always try Craigslist. That's always an option. Just be careful there. So, okay. Let's see. We got how many more questions do we have here? Alyssa says, I did 5 mini sessions today, and I just realized one forgot to sign the contract. They paid me. Should I let it go? I'd say yes. You got paid. If you want to send them a copy of the contract and ask them to sign it in a self-addressed envelope or whatever, or email them and tell them, hey, I'm sorry, no big deal, forgot to have this done. Can I run this by you? Sign it on an iPad or however you're going to do it. If you want, it's not a big deal. If you don't make a big deal out of it, probably nothing will happen. The only thing is if it's a model release and you want to use those pictures for anything else, like advertising or editorial, you will have to have a model release. Now, you do not have to have a model release on your own website for your own personal marketing, but you may need it if you want to do something with those photos. So, it's up to you. It depends on the relationship you have with them and what kind of you thought how the shoot went. Okay. So last question. I got a couple more here over here. I'm new and I'd love to start a client closet for this business, but I also don't have many clients. Can I write anything from Etsy off as business expense? Okay, here's another business question. I don't know what a client closet is. I assume this is either someone from UK or somewhere else, and maybe that's a different term, or I apologize, it could be a term that they use in Etsy terminology for something. But the point is, if you are using, again, not an attorney, I'm not an accountant, so don't take this as, advice. It's just in my opinion. If you're selling through Etsy and you're selling photographs or photography-related products, then that could be part of your product. Yes, you should be able to do that. I don't see any reason why. If it's a business expense and you're creating revenue from Etsy and your photography, then yes, that would also, anything you spend money on, supplies and things like that, would also be considered an expense. Okay, let's see here. I don't know what that means. This is kind of weird. All right, so Keith asks again, what is image format? Well, it's kind of a broad question, Keith, but it's like anything else. It's a file format. There's JPEGs, which is a file format. There's PNGs. There's TIFFs. There's RAW files. An image format is just the file format that the computer writes, or the camera writes the image in, or the computer writes it in. It's just the format and how it lays it out and what programs can read it. JPEG, JPG extensions are probably the most common. The next one would be a PNG, which is a little better quality image, and it's just so it just has to do with what camera you're using and what you're going to do with the image. Some images are larger than others depending on the file format. Some are compressed, some are uncompressed. What's your favorite lens? Oh man, I have a lot of them. One of them I have is a 200 millimeter f2.0 lens. That thing's massive. It's beautiful though. It's really great lens. I have a lens for my Micro Four Thirds camera, which was a 42.5 1.2. That's a beautiful lens. There's just a lot of great lenses out there. That's a problem. So I don't really have any, it's hard to say favorite because it depends on what I'm shooting. I mean, they're different. It's like a different tool for a different job, and so You know, if I'm doing portraiture, I usually start with my 85 1.4. That's a great lens, but it just depends. I like prime lenses without zooms if I can shoot with them. If I'm not in an area where I really have to move around a lot. Okay, let's see what else we got here. I think that's actually about it. So again, I'm going to remind you, I've mentioned it before, but I will remind you again, if you want to submit your photos for review on the 6th, I think, the first Friday of the month, you can send me up to 3 images. You can, the images will be reviewed anonymously, so don't worry, it's nothing to be embarrassed about. We all have to start somewhere. I'm not going to be mean about it. I'm not going to, you know, I'll look at them and see if they work based on composition, and see if they work technically, and see if they work based on the subject. Then on the first Friday of the month, I will we'll put together a review, and I use a little, kind of still working this out, but I've got a little pen system. I can draw on the photo and kind of show you where I think some things, maybe if you want to crop it, that kind of stuff. So if you want instructions on how to submit your photos, you can send an email to help@photomentor.tv and put the word review in the subject. I appreciate it, and then that will help filter it out and make it a little bit easier for me to get your email, so I don't get mixed up with all the rest of the emails that I get. I guess that's about it for this week. I want to thank everybody for joining us. Again, we do this every Friday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. I guess that is 6 p.m. Pacific Time on the West Coast. And if you're in another part of the world, that would be 100 GMT, or I guess it's Universal Coordinated Time, UTC time. Anyway, but I enjoy having me with you here, and I hope this has been beneficial for you. And again, be sure and check us out next week. If you're watching this on the replay, that's okay, because you know, you can still submit photos or still submit questions by sending them to help@photomentor.tv. And we'll be glad to include them next week. Or if not next week, we will. I'll try and answer them directly. Sometimes the questions that you ask are important enough I can reply right away and give you an answer. So, anyway, thanks very much. Enjoyed it, and see you next week.